Very pleased that we're starting this conference by discussing early childhood. You know, early childhood is something that a lot of business groups have gotten involved with recently. And those of you who come from various parts of the country know that there are local business organizations focused on this around the country. But I'm told that CED is maybe one of the longest standing business organizations involved in early childhood education. We place great importance on this because we think that investing in a child's education from the onset really does lead to and ensure success, not only through primary school but also through secondary school and then certainly on into the workforce. And we as a business community are the primary consumers of the output of our education system. And I know we don't think of it that way, but as the primary consumers, we need to have a stake in this, and we need to have a say in it. And unfortunately, I don't think the business community thinks of themselves as being shepherds of our education system, or even like we have a say in it sometimes. But we do, and we should, and it starts with early childhood. We greatly appreciate the leadership and support of the Alliance for Early Success, which continues to provide funding for our national and state level initiatives, and to our program officer who's here today, Helene Stebbins. So Helene, thank you for your support. Now, I'd like to invite the panel to come forward as I introduce the panel. We've made considerable progress over the time on early childhood education. Please do just come on up, and I'll keep talking and so that you can get organized here. But corporations around the country now are committing millions of dollars to public-private partnerships, especially for at-risk kids. 40 states now provide early childhood programs, and the total nationwide investment is $400 million greater today than it was even pre-recession. But much of our work remains, and I'm excited to hear from our very knowledgeable panel, which today includes two of our trustees, Larry Jensen and Butch Graves, a decade-long advisor of our Early Education Subcommittee, Joan Lombardi, and our early funder, the Lego Foundation, with Randa Grob-Zakhary at the helm, and they have been working on early childhood education for a very long period of time. So here to moderate is one of our nation's preeminent leaders in the early childhood field, and that's Lisa Guernsey. Lisa is the Early Education Initiative Director at the New America Foundation. New America is a nonpartisan think tank in Washington where she focuses on how to scale up high-quality learning environments for young children from birth through age 8. She's been an education writer for the New York Times and is the author of Screen Time: How Electronic Media, from Baby Videos to Educational Software, Affects Your Young Child. And her next book will be how the Twitter handle is very important for early childhood and for babies. So with that, Lisa, thank you for being here. Welcome to our panel.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate it. So can everyone hear me? Okay, good. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much to CED for inviting me to moderate this panel. I think it's a really important topic to start off all sorts of discussions about the success of our country and economic opportunities, because early childhood education is where it all starts. So I'm going to take a moment just to briefly introduce you to our panel, and we're really, I think it's pretty amazing to have this really incredibly diverse array of perspectives up here, but also folks who are incredibly committed to this. And then I'm going to take just a couple minutes to give you some context, what we've seen at New America in terms of where we stand. And then I'm going to start lobbing some questions at our panelists here. And we hope to have time at the end for some Q&A as well. So if you are thinking of something that you'd like to ask, please hold that, and we can get to that at the end. So we'll start at the end, just to let you know who's with us. Joan Lombardi, if you have not already heard of Joan's amazing work in the early childhood field, this is someone who I have learned a ton from over the past 10 years and who is a real giant in this area. She's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary and Inter-Departmental Liaison for Early Childhood at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in this current administration, although she moved on from that position just about a year and a half ago, but also served in a similar role during the Clinton administration. So has really seen over time how much has changed, and in the middle of all of, in between all of that, has made enormous strides for a lot of us in the policy world to understand the intersections of childcare, Head Start, and pre-K programs. So next to Joan, we have Butch Graves, who is the president and CEO for Black Enterprise, and is also a Harvard MBA, and has years and years of experience in the magazine and broadcast world, so understands the publishing world deeply, but also has been looking at the areas of education and how they intersect with what our needs are in the business area for a long time. Larry Jensen is next to Butch. He's the president and CEO for Cushman and Wakefield Commercial Advisors, and has been working in the area of commercial real estate for over 35 years, and is looking at his bio, and there's much more in your packets, so please take a look for everyone who's up here, but has been working deeply in Memphis, Tennessee, where he's based, at a lot of community involvement in early childhood education and investments. And then here, just next to me, we have Randa Grob-Zakhary, who is the CEO of the Lego Foundation, and who has really, I think, will bring the philanthropic perspective to this, but also has a doctorate in medicine and in neuroscience, and can really help us speak, and will speak to a lot of what we know about the science of child development and how that's informing what we need to do when we give children the best possible environments. So, so thank you all very much for being here. Let me start by just reflecting on the title of this particular panel, The Unfinished Business of Early Childhood Education. It's an incredibly apt title for many reasons. One, of course, is that in 2012, CED published a report that I encourage you to take a look at if you haven't seen it yet, titled The Unfinished Business of Early Childhood Education. And in that report lays out very strongly the case for continuing to make investments in this area. But I think it's also a really important title for this because as much as there's a lot of attention now to early childhood policy, investments in say, preschool or changes in childcare, we really are, in some ways, still at the beginning of ensuring that more and more children have access to what we consider kind of a high-quality learning environment. At the New America Foundation this January, we put out a report titled Subprime Learning, Early Education Since the Great Recession. And in that, our intent was to just look back over 5 years and say, okay, where are we now that we've come through this really pretty awful time? And it was a pretty sobering experience for us as analysts at New America to look at this. What we found was fairly sobering, that in the wake of a financial crash triggered by subprime lending, as we labeled it, we really found that too many children were still experiencing subprime learning. Funding was fluctuating wildly during that time, and in some places still is. Millions of children still lack access to quality early childhood programs. The K through third grades, which are still part of early childhood, especially when you look at the developmental science of how children learn and grow, those grades haven't received all that much attention. And we are still seeing achievement gaps in reading and math in the elementary school years, and in fact, the newest data is showing that those gaps are widening between families of less means and those of higher incomes. We also have poverty rates that have really shot up across the country to the point where it's often, in some places, it's more than 1 in 5 children under the age of 6 who are in poverty. So we had some one-time money that came in during those Great Recession years, that stimulus funding, and that certainly was an enormous boon for the world of early childhood education in terms of being able to just staunch the bleeding. But since then, funding really kind of flattened out. Now this year, there have been some really nice bright spots. And we're starting to see states especially making more and more investment in this area. The Alliance for Early Success, which has funded the work of CED and is also helping us at New America and helped to fund that subprime learning report, they've been working in many states to ensure that they are putting together the research policy and advocacy community to help states invest not only in preschool programs, but in home visiting programs and other programs that will help young children thrive. I want to take a minute to tell you about the science, just for a second. For those of you who have come to this area just today, or who are new trustees and looking into what does early childhood education even mean? I said a moment ago that it's not just about preschool. There is a growing trend to imagine early childhood as starting before birth, really understanding the influences prenatally, and extending all the way up through that third grade year when children are really kind of transitioning and becoming more analytical in their thinking, so that they can really thrive when they get to fourth grade. So that's a big trend line out there that's been happening, and that has been propelled by the science. There have been many studies, more than just the classic studies that you hear about. Often you'll hear about the Perry Preschool Project, which started in the 1970s, or a few others that have shown what happens when you help children, give them access to a high-quality preschool program, and then track their progress up through high school, up through adulthood. Those studies have shown some really remarkable results for kids and adults as they become adults. But we have more than just those studies now. We have an accumulation of results from studies from Tulsa, Oklahoma, from Boston Public Schools, from Georgia, from Tennessee, from Washington State, that are helping to shine a spotlight on what really works in these kinds of programs and how we need to follow through and ensure that those gains are sustained up into those early elementary grades. And then on top of this, we have the voices of those like James Heckman, who is a Nobel Prize winner in economics and who is known for the Heckman equation, which is looking at how cost-effective it could be for our country if we were to invest very early in high-quality learning environments for children, enabling them to build the characters and the skill set that they need to be able to thrive in school and in life. So that science has started to resonate more and more deeply, not only within the education community, but absolutely within the business community, and that's where CED has played such a strong role. So I'm going to turn now to, that's just a little background, and I know that for many of you on the panel, that probably was what you'd heard before, but I hope for those of you who haven't been versed in this, that give you kind of a sense of things. And we can get back into some of the politics of everything maybe later in our discussion here, but I want to start by talking to Larry and Butch to ask you some questions from the business perspective. And Larry, why don't I start with you? If you could tell us a little bit about why you're here. Why is it that someone from Cushman and Wakefield, commercial real estate, is on a panel where we're talking about early childhood education, and if you can relate that into your community in Memphis.
I need to turn this on. No, it's on. Well, it's a journey that really started looking at our community, Memphis, from a business perspective, and looking at workforce issues. Probably was originally one of the issues is what were we doing in the community to address that? And in our particular demographics in our community, there's a lot of challenges there for a lot of the reasons that will become apparent when we have some of the experts at this talk more about it. But I served as president of Memphis Tomorrow, which is 28 CEOs. This was 01 through 04. I think actually Steve Odlin was the chairman at that time, as he was in Memphis as the CEO at AutoZone. So we worked together, and we set an agenda that was driven by the business community, but it was not a business agenda in the sense that we were looking at issues in our community that had impact on creating a good place to live, and a place where you could run a business, and a place where you could feel comfortable that you could have a prepared workforce. And when you looked at Memphis Tomorrow's agenda, it was just, there was nothing really business directly, as much as it was, what are the things that we have to do as a community to address making it a place where we could run a business successfully. And one of the agendas that came out of there was a program called Fast Forward, which had a number of components in it, but one of them is called People First. And within the People First, there was one particular lane there that was the early childhood. You combine that with a organization, there was a hospital, La Bonheur, a children's hospital, that was sold to one of the systems, and they had a sizable amount of money out of that, and they created a foundation now called the Urban Child Institute, and they do an annual data on early childhood. They are totally focused, frankly, on 0 to 3. And there's an awful lot of information. It's focused on Shelby County, which is the county within which Memphis is. And you put that together with a very active faith-based community that's addressing the issues of children, and there's a real movement in our town that's really addressing the early childhood. And then last year we were in Atlanta, and Dr. Heckman spoke, and it was just like sort of everything kind of came together for me to understand this issue of the importance of addressing this. We're dealing with a lot of issues down the road, the crime and the education challenges, et cetera, but the understanding of the 0 to 3, even before birth, and the impacts of brain development and all that, it just really resonated with me. And I really began to think about that a lot, and so the CED emphasis on this was just very meaningful to me at a crossroads that I was in.
And I understand also that you have is it a granddaughter, grandson?
I don't mind. Would you like to see a picture?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm just,
I do.
Often, and I found this happened for me, myself, in terms of my interest in early childhood. It just, it was definitely nice and steady, and then suddenly I had a baby, and I was like, oh my goodness, I gotta, here I am, I'm way up here now.
Just a comment on that, and I've said at our table before the meeting, this little girl's got 7 or 8 people hovering over her with the stimulation and the reading and all that, and I think about the child that's on the other side of town that just doesn't have that. And there's just compassion for me to say, we got to do something about that.
So, Butch, tell us a little bit about, almost maybe the same question, why is it that this is a compelling area for you to focus on, and what is it from your life experience that's kind of brought you to this understanding of the importance of early childhood?
Well, to follow on to Larry's comments in regards from a more basic business thing, I think it manifests itself in the people that we ultimately interview and or hire. And I'll take it back to even before we get to the point of interviewing and hiring, but I speak to a number of presidents of colleges and HBCUs in particular, and what troubles them is that they end up spending the first year in college having to teach remedial skills to people who are high school graduates. Not of any fault of their own, but frankly, people who have been pushed through the system, who didn't have access to early childhood education. And then ultimately who we receive ends up being, when I say we in business receive, or interview to bring on, end up being people who have not necessarily had as much exposure to early childhood education, much less a complete high school education, depending upon the resources of where they came from. For me, it resonates in that I see this as almost an issue between the haves and have-nots, not necessarily an issue of race or gender or what have you, but truly an issue of resources. And in those places where there are, in fact, resources, I'm born and raised in New York and live in, and there's no more, if you will, diverse or divisive a city than there is New York City, because it's diverse yet divisive. And you can see the difference in children at an early age who've had an opportunity or been exposed to. I was speaking at our table, and I have twin daughters that are now adults, still as much of a pain in the ass now as they were then. But when they were going through and going into preschool, and where we live in Westchester County, and it's sort of a semi-well-to-do, if you will, place. But we had to keep up. So my wife was focused on they got to go to preschool, and they got to get ahead and only above. And I said, well, how are we going to send them to preschool? They can't even speak. They don't communicate. They only communicate amongst themselves. But they got there, and they were able to pick it up quick enough. But what I thought was fascinating is that when they were in kindergarten, my wife was telling me, well, their friends, some of whom read the New York Times, that are 5, that are in kindergarten. And so what happened is, what you see is you have this group of people who is overly focused on, I've got to get my child to be advanced or further ahead than everybody else. Now, when you go across town, as Larry would say, and another side of what I do is I coach AAU basketball, which is a passion of mine because it's an opportunity for me to give back to something that gave a great deal to me. But those kids, 90% of them are coming from single-parent households. Their mothers are only want the best for their son, but their preschool education, really not preschool education, it's really a drop-off so they can go off to work. So it's not preschool education, it's really daycare. And there's a huge difference between daycare and preschool education. And so these kids have not been given the access to. They're very, very bright kids, but you can tell the difference even at age 8, 9, 10, by the time that we're starting to coach them, those that have had access to true preschool education, as you guys have defined it, versus a drop-off to go and just be held until mom can come back and pick them up after work. So the question is, what responsibility does business hold to this? And I think that we hold a great responsibility to it, because ultimately that is the workforce that's coming through. And for those that don't understand that or are not willing to accept the changing demographics in this country, then ultimately, and are not prepared to reinvest in the changing demographics of the country, ultimately your workforce will become a less educated workforce, and you'll have to spend more money to be able to do things that will be more expensive at age 23 than it would be at age 1. So to me, it's sort of a bottom line thing that I think that business bears a responsibility to understand what's at hand and what's at stake for them, and to invest accordingly.
Thank you. So, Joan, I know that you've seen the business community's involvement for a long time. In fact, you've seen a lot in terms of early childhood policy and its evolution. What are you following now? What's kind of most on your mind, keeping you up at night?
Well, Lisa, it's interesting to hear that it's been a journey, because it has been a journey, and I must commend CED. I remember when they launched the Children in Need report in 1987, and I brought it with me. We were looking through it at the table, and although there's been some changes, there's still a lot of children in need. So this has been a long journey, and we still have a long way to go. What is exciting now, and what I've kind of been following, is that I think there's a much greater awareness than there was back in 1987, that the early years matter. They matter to lifelong learning, they matter to health, they matter to behavior. And I think those messages and the science behind that I know we'll talk about, is really starting to break through. At the same time, however, when you say what keeps me up at night, my children are gone now, so they're not keeping me up anymore. I do have a grandchild. But I think what is still troubling is that we're not, as a country, providing the kind of environment for parents that enables their parenting, that supports them. What we see across the country, and I'm sure what you see among your own employees, are people that are very rushed, that don't have adequate time. We're expecting women to go back to work right away after they have after they have a child. We still have a lot of people that don't have access to the kind of work environments that support their family life. And so as much as we want to encourage their parenting, if we don't provide adequate time, resources, and I would say good childcare, that does have an education component, because you can have a childcare program that's full day that has an education component. We're not providing the kind of enabling environment that I think we deserve, parents deserve, and we should be doing as a country. Things are getting, I'm excited that we're getting some new attention to 0 to 3, a new home visiting program, new investments in early Head Start partnerships, which is thrilling to see. A lot of attention to preschool in the States. I think we're hearing about that every day. At the same time, I think all of us that have been in the community for a long time are very aware of the fact that people are expecting results. And actually, if you look at the early childhood sector, our own workforce needs a lot of attention. So the other adult in a child's life is often the preschool teacher, the child care provider. Yet we know even if you have a BA degree, you're getting a fraction of what you'd get in the public schools, that your working conditions are not what they should be to enable a quality environment. So this is a job category that I hope gets more attention over the upcoming years, and I hope we make it a job that's attractive to people. I ask young college students if they're interested in what are they interested in going into? And when I don't hear early childhood, it makes me sad, because it's a wonderful job, it's a calling, and I think we have to give some attention to both the environments for parents and the environments for the workforce.
And your reference to just the rushed nature of today's families, I just was going to maybe kind of put an exclamation point on that as a working mom with kids at home. But one of the things that I feel is part of understanding early childhood education is recognizing that what happens for a child in those hours when he or she is in the child care center or in that preschool, that then comes home with the child. And so if it's a very relaxed and nurturing environment, and mom goes to pick up her daughter, and there's a happy child there who's excited to show you what she's created, then that makes that evening like, okay, you can breathe and you can kind of be a good parent. If you're picking a child up who has been stressed or neglected all day, there's a tantrum waiting for you as a parent. And so on top of all that additional stress that you are facing as a working parent, you're kind of coping with that too. And I've just been thinking about that feedback loop more and more myself. So Randa, let me ask you, that I would love to bring in some of your background from the science side of this, and what it is that got you involved in this field, given that you started in neuroscience.
It is an interesting thing to think how a former neurosurgeon would end up as the head of the Lego Foundation, but it's actually incredibly related, and I'd like to just tell you this small story. I think my being here is the representation of two very different interests coming together, one very set of professional interests and personal. Professionally, I began my career in medicine, very near here at the Hopkins University, Hopkins School of Medicine, where I planned a career in pediatric neurosurgery. And I began down that path. I have a PhD in neuroscience, as was said. And I'll tell you that there is where I really developed an incredible awe of the brain, both what we know, but more importantly, what we don't know yet. And I have just always been fascinated by neuroscience and neurosurgery. Skipping ahead a bit to tell you that in that phase, of course, especially at Hopkins and academic universities like this, one of the things you develop is a passion for understanding and knowing the latest. What do we know? What do we not know? How can we use that information? When I became a mother, I was for the first time holding, a child for whose brain I was responsible. And it recalled these memories in school. I think many of us have heard about this, but let me just replay a few key facts because they are the reason we're on the stage today. The brain does not grow linearly as we age. It grows exponentially in the first few years of life. And it's not to scare anyone. Of course, things happen as we mature. But these few years have been shown with incredibly compelling evidence. There is not a doubt. There are so many things that happen in those first few years. And let me also remind that part of the reason those years are so critical is that, as you know, many of you either have children or grandchildren or have seen children around you, even though they reach milestones at different ages, we go through pretty much the same sequence. And that is because there is a predetermined, timed pattern of development of different pathways in your body. And you can correlate these one-to-one with the appearance of milestones. And I say this because this is another reason why we're here today. There are a number of things that happen in those first 8 years. Let's even take it to the 3rd grade, as you were saying, Lisa. There are so many things. If you do not build it in that period, you cannot build it back. You cannot build it back. And this is why the remedial work can help. It can alleviate, but it cannot reverse the neglect that's happened earlier or the lack of support. So when I had my child, I did what many in the room do. I wanted to read everything I could about what was going on in there. I wanted to read everything, and I read quite a lot. I read a lot of popular literature, and I was really interested and surprised to see, even though a lot of books were interesting, very few were based on fact. And the few that were based on fact gave some technical information about development, but didn't necessarily equip you with what you could do. And so I went back to my roots, and I started looking at the literature over the last decade. And I was shocked to understand and learn how much we have uncovered about all kinds of areas of development: social, emotional, intellectual, motor, so many things. And that's because the techniques have exploded. And the sad part is, and here's coming to the point, here's how I changed my focus and why I'm here today. The sad part is we've not used this information. There is no profession that is really mandated to bringing the science, the good science, because there is also a lot of junk. There's no one mandated to bring that out to those of you who are business leaders or decision makers, policy influencers. There is a gap, and science doesn't speak for itself. And so, faced with new motherhood and knowing that and recognizing this, I changed my focus on early childhood development.
And the just that picture that you paint, which I think is so important, of that incredible growth in those first several years of life, is something we really cannot forget. There's also, and I'm sure you're familiar with this too, for those in the room who are not, there's a new kind of literature of what's called toxic stress that is the accumulation of kind of adverse interactions that babies have in their earliest years. And scientists at Harvard, at the Center for the Developing Child, and at many other places are looking at what that means and what it means for policy in terms of ensuring that the environments that children have then in those very early years do not lead to that accumulative effect there. And let me turn it back to you, Larry. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit of, giving us a sense of what's happening in Memphis, but how to mobilize the business. What are some to-dos, either for those in the room or for those who are listening, in terms of how to talk with the business community and help to kind of set on fire some of these ideas? What's been most effective, for instance, in Memphis, or what is the first elevator pitch you ever gave on this?
Well, I would encourage the business leaders in here to take this as a study, to take the time to really comprehend some of the things that are being said. There's now available materials that are at your fingertips on the subject, and so I think they have to become knowledgeable and begin to care about that issue. I think what we've been able to do is to bring together the business community and the philanthropy community and as I said, the faith community and government, all of them in the same room, and begin to say this is an issue as a community that we cannot ignore any longer. And and we're not, I don't want to make it sound like we're way down the road, but we're a lot farther down the road than we were 10 years ago. But one of the things that's happened is that the funders are requiring transparency on data from the organizations delivering service. So that we have a thing called Shelby Connect, and their job is to gather this information about who's being served, how they're being served, and so that there's now a more business-like approach, if you will, to this issue in the community, not to throw the compassion away at all, but to actually make it more efficacious in the way it's delivered. And I think that the business community has to step up and say this is an issue in a local environment that we need to understand, and we need to gather the people, because in our city at least, there are a lot of people doing a lot of good things, but there's really has been very little coordination around those things, and that's what we're starting to see is some effort to coalesce the providers and to require transparency on their data. That I think we're at a place shortly where if you're asking for funding, it's no longer who can outmarket, but can you show performance, and can you show that you're willing to put forth your data as an organization, and so that we can gather that as a whole and also work toward a better delivery of the early childhood things.
Mm-hmm. So, Butch, do you have some of the same thoughts, or let me actually maybe rephrase it just a little bit. I'm curious if there are some messages that fall flat, that if there are moments that you've seen over your experience that just are not resonating with people, and so there's a need for corrective action in the way we think about the investments we need to make in kids.
Well, I'm going to tie it back into sort of the Common Core conversation that we had actually a few months ago with CED, and I think there's this constant battle here, I guess not just here in Washington, but everywhere now, on Common Core and what's the proper, is it the right thing to do or right thing to ask for? I think Common Core is the right thing to ask for, but Common Core without common resources doesn't work. And what's not addressed is the common resources. So the message then falls flat. So you can go to someone and say, here's the standard we're going to set. And one school has, a computer for every 3 kids. And then you go to another school, say, here's the standard we're going to have, and they have 1 computer for every 300 kids. And so it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that it's, with all due respect, that the person who's in the school with 1 for every 300 computers is not going to have the same access or the same ability to be able to at least access some of those things necessary. And so it brings into question a whole bunch of different things. In New York City right now, there's a big fight because people don't want to accept Common Core. And this is not just, the sort of the lower end schools of the school, but it's even the higher end schools, because no one wants to be held accountable to what it should be. But again, I think that the resources have to be equal in some way, shape, or form, so that you can, hearing the information that you're sharing in regards to, those formative years are the most important. It's very sad, because then that means that if we get a kid, oftentimes they're saying, okay, we're going to start with him at the 5th grade. Well, if we're starting with him at the 5th grade and they've already missed 0 to 8, then, no matter how hard they work, they're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as much. And that's troubling. So, it's a never-ending, it's a circular conversation. Where people tend to want to talk around it rather than addressing directly the problem. But to me, the common problem is we've got to get resources pushed down through all the way into almost mandating preschool, rather than saying you can start at age 6. And it's interesting, what I do see, which is funny, I see parents, especially in sports, I see parents holding kids back for motor skills so that they can be better in sports, like they're going to be a professional soccer player. They can see at age 2 they're going to be a professional soccer player, whatever it's going to be. So I'm going to hold them back a year so they can be further ahead athletically rather than wanting to invest the time and effort to move their brain forward, to develop their brain. They're more concerned with developing their motor skills. So it's not a simple issue, but I think resources would play a large role in that.
And I should note on the Common Core, this is something at New America we've looked at quite a bit. The Common Core, which we're in favor of at New America, starts in kindergarten, but often kindergarten is only half of a day, or the kids who've come into kindergarten haven't had any of these experiences that we're talking about here. So it's a really important and very kind of troubling intersection at that kindergarten stage. Yes, please. Yeah, here.
I know we didn't rehearse this. Yeah. No, there's just, you brought up a really important point about the age, and it's an opportunity to comment that across the globe we see a really interesting misunderstanding about why we should start earlier. And we just wanted to take a moment to clear that up, because in some cases, or in many cases, there's a feeling that we want to get kids in to learn earlier and more. I know that's not what you're saying, but I think it's a great chance to clarify that this is not about getting the content in earlier and shoving it in so they'll do better on the test. It is because there are really important processes for learning how to learn. And when we lay those down early, when those pathways are being developed, they learn more effectively as they grow. So I wonder, in the cases where those messages fall flat, if opening up the understanding of what are children actually learning, between 0 and 5, and how does that help them learn better, that might perhaps alleviate the argumentation.
That's wonderful, thank you. And actually, maybe that leads a little bit into what I was going to ask you, Joan, in terms of, there's kind of competitiveness that runs through some of the conversations here, and people also recognize more and more that internationally, other countries are figuring this out and are investing in new ways. The workforce that you raised this issue from the beginning, Joan, that we're going to have to recognize what our teachers need. Can you talk a little bit about that when it comes to other countries where you've been and visited, and how they might be investing in what that teacher is?
Well, and we are seeing a tremendous interest. I mean, this early childhood movement is kind of a global revolution in really recognizing that learning begins at birth. And I was really glad to hear Randa talk about what that really means, because it is about encouraging persistence, encouraging curiosity. It's not just about the skills that people normally think about. It's helping that child learn to learn. What I see happening around the world is two things. One, a tremendous interest in early childhood and preschool emerging in places far beyond what we're doing here in the U.S. At the same time, we know that although we've had a reduction in the number of children that are dying before they're 5 around the world, we still have about 200 million children whose development is at risk because of poverty, because of malnutrition. So you've got this kind of dual picture, kind of the way the picture that we have here. There was a report out last year by UNICEF's Innocenti Center that looked at child well-being for children under 5 in 29 of the wealthier countries. Where was the United States? We were 26th. That's not what I think the business community wants. I don't think it's what parents want. I would really challenge the country to become an early learning nation. And to me, that would mean really looking at how our children are doing at birth. Are they thriving at 3? Looking at the data. Are they ready for success at 5? Not waiting till you get third grade reading scores. It's way too late to do that. So, I think that I see excitement in communities like we heard about in Memphis, but we still have a long way to go.
So we're going to open up to questions in just a moment here, but I wanted to ask Ron if there was, you at one point had mentioned that there was a kind of a game sometimes you like to play with panelists up on stage, and help us kind of think about what it means to be learning to learn. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe explain that, and then start thinking about questions, and we'll go to some Q&A.
I'm going to answer that, but I'm going to turn it into an opportunity to speak a little bit about what we're doing, and because that's how it was. Because it really gets to this point about learning how to learn. So while I'm explaining that, you may open. What they have are very small sets. I'm going to ask you to build a duck. And I'm going to illustrate a point.
And for those who can't see, they obviously have Legos, right?
Lego bricks, yes. They have 6 to 7 bricks. Different shapes you build, but just, I'm going to keep talking. Okay. Don't look at each other though, right? No, this is not the collaboration part, even though we believe in it. Just this moment. Now, what I wanted to share here is that, even though the Lego company works very much across the childhood range, the foundation is working at this moment. We're in a transition. We are ramping up with a new vision, and it's not about promoting early childhood. And I want to raise this for all the business people in the audience. This is about creating empowered children who are critical and creative thinkers, who grow up to be empathic global citizens and lifelong learners. And that is what we're about. That is what we are pursuing. And because we are new in this area from a foundation perspective, we are starting with early childhood because for all the reasons the panelists have said, we see a tremendous possibility for impact. This is an area where play is prevalent, but it is most misunderstood. And we know that play is one of the most effective ways to reach some of those skills I talked about. We know that. It's not the only way, but it is a very effective way. So what we are doing is pursuing ways of sharing the evidence that exists, programming around the world, and speaking with people like yourself to engage you and build and talk about how tools like this, not only Lego bricks, but tools like this are an analogy for how children construct things in the mind. So let's see now. You guys should be done.
I don't think so.
Let's see what you've built. There's no right answer. I really need you to wrap it up.
Okay, that's close.
Okay,
That's as
super.
close as I
That's
can get.
wonderful. Great.
I got a piece left.
Great effort. You hold on to that. We're going to use that to demonstrate something. And what do you have there, Butch?
How'd you do, Butch?
I'm not really doing particularly well.
So. Come, no, that's great. There is no right or wrong, and they're totally different. Okay, totally different. Now I'm going to give it to you, and give it to Joan, and make another duck. Anything you want, okay?
Can I give her this piece? Or
Whatever you want.
Here,
Yes.
here.
While they're doing it, and I hope it will confirm, yes, please go ahead. Just make a duck. There's no right or wrong. But what I'm illustrating here is a little game. But this is actually the essence of the Lego idea, and I'd like to tell you just a little bit about it because you might wonder why the foundation is interested in these topics. The company is 80 years old, a little more than 80 years old, and it's still family-owned. And the founder, Ole Kirk Christiansen, was a carpenter. And he ended up changing the family focus to making toys. A long story that I'll make very short. But the essence was he knew already, even though he couldn't articulate the scientific evidence behind it, he knew, and the family afterward knew, that play is learning. And certain kinds of play are more valuable for learning, especially in the early age groups. So there's free play, which has incredible value, but there's also guided play. Guided play is what we do to help children reach specific learning goals. And so let's now look at your ducks. Again, different. So we've had 4 ducks, totally different. There's really an infinite number, maybe not totally infinite, but hundreds of thousands of possibilities with these bricks. And this is the concept that is essential for our workforce and for job skills and life preparedness. It's the idea that when we make something, whether it's with bricks, whether it's a solution in our mind, when we make something, we reflect on it, we take it apart, we make something new, we create new possibilities with the knowledge we have in our head and the tools we have in the hand. And that's why I was excited to see that you gave her another piece. You can do more. This is where the combination of content and learning process comes together. Of course, content is important, but it alone is not enough to drive the skills you need and we need for the future. And that is the essence of what we're doing, and there's the game. Now we can open for questions.
Depending on how many questions there might be out there. So I don't know if there is a mic to pass around. Oh, yes, there is. Good. If you want to just raise your hand or stand up, and if you could just identify yourself, and feel free to direct to one panelist or to everybody.
Hi, it's Lenny Mendonça, CED trustee. I wonder if you could tell us someplace in the country where you think this is really working well and what we can learn from what enabled that to actually work.
Thanks. Well, I actually think there are several communities across the country. The first one that came into my mind was Palm Beach County, Florida, where they're doing exactly what's happening in Memphis. And Palm Beach County is not just a wealthy county, by the way. It's a very diverse county. But the community is coming together to focus on the trajectory of children from prenatal to 5. And they're working together, and they're collecting their data together. They're looking at results. And I think there are other communities like that all around the country, as we heard in Memphis. And those are the kinds of initiatives that need much more support. We need to network them. They don't all need to be recreating the wheel, especially around databases and things like that. So I actually think there are plenty of places across the country that are doing this. They're just under-resourced and under-recognized.
I might, if I could, just take the prerogative for a moment to answer. This is something New America certainly looks at quite a bit as well. And lately we've been looking at the Boston Public Schools and what they're doing in ensuring that there's not just continuity between their preschool program and what's happening in kindergarten, but also ensuring that the teaching in those grade levels is playful and intentional, appropriate to the age of children, but also still challenging for them. And they're starting to see some real results in changing teaching behavior as well as child outcomes. So it gives me some hope for our elementary years as much as our preschool years. Let's take another question right here.
You've been speaking of what should be happening for the children, but you haven't, nobody has mentioned who should be doing it, and the presumption in the comments are that people outside the family are accountable, which obviously probably isn't going to happen for prenatal situations, at least not very readily. So my question is really, is part of the research about who should be doing it at what point in time that gets the best results, and how does that overlay to what obviously are hugely different home circumstances, whether they are economic or social or cultural or all that other kind of stuff?
I think there are a number of initiatives that are happening right now, and they point to that question. And I think if we've missed speaking about parents, it's simply an oversight on our part, because they are a critical part of the equation. I'd like to share, there's incredible examples, especially outside the U.S. I'm actually not too familiar with examples that do what I'm about to describe in the U.S., so Joan, if you know some, please say. But what is really recognized now is exactly what you pointed out. There's been really fundamental findings that no matter what you provide in the preschool setting, if you don't address the home setting and the needs of the parents, you cannot make lasting changes. So there are places in Brazil where they have done that, and they actually work with the parents in the centers, not just for the purpose of supporting the children, but supporting the needs of the parent and parents' development. At the Center for the Developing Child, Jack Shonkoff and his group are very much equally looking at adult outcomes and children's outcomes, because they know it's essential. If you can't move the adult, you will not move the child. And these things are happening around the globe. They're really critical, so I'm glad you raised it. I think the research is still very fresh in that regard. And currently, as we speak, the government of South Africa is developing a comprehensive early childhood development package. And why that is remarkable is that it's not only about early learning, it's a comprehensive policy and subsequent programming for health, nutrition, learning, and children with disabilities. And it begins in the fetal period. It begins before birth by targeting parents. And this is an incredible effort across sectors to look holistically at the child's development and at the child's environment. So I think there are a lot of exciting examples to take away from. Maybe you'd like to speak about some in the U.S.
And it's really important that you said that. I feel like we know that families matter. Families matter more than anything, and in a 21st century environment, we also know that families are two-parent working families, single-parent working families. So there is a balance between what we can do to support parents and what we can do to support the programs that children are in. It's not one or the other, and I think that's the exciting part of what I'm seeing now. Parenting programs emerging, home visiting programs emerging, as well as preschool. It's really a partnership between the family and the programs in the schools the children are going to go into. But obviously, families make a huge difference in children's lives. We all know that about our own children and about our own grandchildren.
How much those early learning teachers help parents become more aware of how much they bring to their kids. Absolutely. Let's see, I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more. Yes, take
So,
one here.
you know, Larry, you were really instructive to me when I came to Memphis as, you know, CEO of AutoZone in trying to help me learn my role as a business leader in the community. But you may want to just connect the dots, and maybe I was the only business leader that really didn't get it. But it started with, you know, a study of the jail and why the jails were full, and then went back to why we weren't graduating people from high school, and that's why the jails were full. And the reason we weren't doing, you know, graduating people from high school is because they never caught up, and it all came back to early childhood. And so all the social costs that were given to the community. But maybe you could just connect all of that, because that was the real aha for me.
Well, our county jail has 2,500 inmates, plus or minus, and then there's a county prison. There's about the same number there, so there's about 5,000 inmates, and they're 95% African American. And when you look at that a little closer, there are about 70% of them that have some kind of learning disability. And what's happening is that, and these are the experts up here, I'm a layman at best on this, but if a young person doesn't learn to read, they can't read to learn. And what happens, at least in our city, is and you can track it almost, the kids born in at-risk environments are, and especially the young boys and men, and they have a choice. What happens, they get to the 3rd grade, they can't really read. They go to another level, they don't learn, and by the 8th grade, there's a dropout rate that looks like a rocket taking off. And these young men don't have an alternative, and they're going to the street, and they're going into the crime part of life, and there are also alternative organizations like Boys and Girls Club and several that are addressing it, and they're having unbelievable success. Boys and Girls Club in our city, for example, they have about 100% graduation rate from high school, and the city schools are about 60%. Well, what's very interesting about at 201 Poplar, that's the jail, that about 95% of the guys there don't have a high school education. They lose hope, and they get into a cycle. And so what we've seen happen with these organizations, and we have about 16 of them that are dealing with at-risk kids, their graduation rates are between 90 and 100% from high school. And as a friend of mine that runs the Black Business Association says, he's involved with what they call Scout Reach in the city, and he says scouts don't go to jail. And the point is that there has to be an intervention into a kid's life that doesn't have that structure, and that's out at 5th, 6th, 7th grade. And even more so, if you can go back and understand 0 to 3, then you can hopefully create a better environment for them. I think we spend $500 million a year on the criminal justice system. What happens if your graduation rate goes up 10 points, or in the next 25 years we could get where it was not acceptable for a kid not to have the support to get out of high school? You could lower the taxes and empty the jails. Now that's a pretty big statement, but I think it's doable. And I think this is true in every community. It may greater or lesser degree in your community. I'd understand that, because I think there's a real challenge there, is how do we put the systems in a lot of what's going to happen, I think, is going to be on the not-for-profit side, on the faith side, that government's got to be a partner, but we got to have people that are down working in the grassroots that really understand and care at the grassroots level for children from 0 to 18 to have a chance to not lose the next generation of kids in this country.
All right, let's get a couple more here. Maybe I'll do two at once, if that's okay. And then, so yes, ma'am, you here. And then right behind you, I can't quite see because of the blinding lights, but maybe I'll take those two questions together, and then you guys can answer them. Yes.
I had the great good fortune of meeting Brad Butler in 1987, right after Children in Need was published. And we have known since then what it is we need to do. And what we've lacked is the political will to do it. We have known in our country what we need to do, and we have gotten, I think, further off course. And I think if CED has a job to do, it is to get the business community to have the people in Congress understand that this is our #1 priority, to get every governor in our states to understand that this is our #1 priority for the future of our democracy, for the future of our country, for the future of our communities, most importantly for the future of our children. And the other piece of this coin, and I think you brought it up, is that we have to make the people, we have to allow the people who work with our children in this very important endeavor to make a living wage. They have, we need them to be graduates of college. We need them to be trained, and we need them to be rewarded for their performance in getting our kids off to the right start. So you can go back, somebody said you had Children in Need, you can go back and read it, and the formula is already there. So I think it's so inspirational for me to see other business people leading the charge, because we have to do it. And this is one of those things, like the Marshall Plan. We can't take no for an answer. I think our country is dependent upon it. So thank you all.
Great comment, thank you. Just behind you.
Yeah, actually, my question is related, so it's a good pairing. What do you think explains our country's failure to engage in this issue as meaningfully as apparently other countries have?
Great, so this is great. We'll end on this question, but I'd love to hear from each one of you on this. I'm dying with curiosity myself. So really, where is the political will? How do we build it? And why haven't we been able to do what other countries have been able to do?
Well, there's a politically correct response to your question, and then there's a reality. I think that the reason you have total shutdown on this issue is that it does not impact most of the people who are making policy and or their children or grandchildren. Larry mentioned, you said that 95% of the people who are in the jails in Memphis are African American. Disproportionately, this issue is a black and brown issue. That's the reality. It's a black and brown issue in that the kids who are not getting the education, who are not getting the opportunities, those are black and brown kids. Unfortunately, the people who are making the policies and who are making the decisions are not, in fact, they're not diverse. So if we're going to deal with the reality of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is that these policies or these things that are impacting, it's a haves and have-not issue. If in fact you have financial resources, your kids have the ability to go through and get to preschool and all the other things that are attached to it. But when it impacts folks who are, quote, not us, and you can kick the can down the road, then in fact it becomes an issue. It's not an issue until such time as it begins to impact bottom line business. I think that's coming. Right, that's coming, because you can't keep kicking this can down the road without beginning to address it, and that's really that's the politically sensitive part that people just don't want to address. That is what the issue is, and I hate to keep making it a black and white issue, but that's really what it comes down to, and hopefully, our politicians will show some maturity on this, regardless of their affiliation, and really begin to address what needs to be addressed.
Go next, Joan.
Well, I think that what you're saying about it's coming, the impact of this on the business community and the lack of the workforce, I think, is what's raising this issue. I mean, you've come a long way since Brad Butler. I mean, he was a lone voice back then. The fact that you've got so many people here willing to talk about it. You've got organizations like Ready Nation, also with encouraging the business community to speak out. But we need a lot more voices, and we need the business community to talk about how it has impacted them right now, and not kick it down the can, not kick the can down the road anymore.
I would go back to the grassroots again with it. I think that it's got to happen in the local community, and it has to become a priority. I'm not sure. I mean, the government, federal government, needs to be a partner, but I'm always concerned when they decide we're going to do something, it somehow doesn't seem to work out very well. But I think the local community and the leadership in the local community has got to be willing to look at it. There was a New York Times article a couple years ago that said, by 2042, America is a minority-majority country. Most every city of any size is already there. If not, it's shortly. And I think to Butch's point that this has to be a priority that's set at the local level to say we're going to do something about this. And the reason is because, number one, we care, and these are our fellow citizens, and this is a country that's very different than it was even 10 years ago. And I just think that we have to have that desire to see our cities, and the core of our cities have got to be healthy. And the way you do that is help people address the issue of the structure of the family. That question was asked. I mean, single moms they're going to make a third less than a married couple in the same environment. And then you look at the whole issue around the education, who's going there. It's got to be addressed holistically. But if you don't look at 0 to 3 carefully and really understand 0 to 3, then you've lost a lot of opportunity down the road to make a difference in a child's life.
I'll add something from a very different angle. I, of course, can only support what was said, but a different perspective is that we need a PR overhaul for preschool. The name preschool, it gives the impression that this is preparing you for the next step, that it's not really essential. And I would even argue that the children of those who don't feel negatively affected by the challenges right now, I would guarantee that a huge number of those children, even if they're in a preschool or a daycare, they're not getting quality support. And even in countries around the world that think they have great standard of care, they're essentially providing place to have a little fun during the day and support the child's physical needs. There's not a lot more than that. And I really invite, I'm sure there are actually a lot of people in the audience who could help with this. Branding of preschool. Let's call it something different. Let's give it a name that really shows how essential and non-trivial it is, and that it's more than a parking place that allows the parents to go off and earn the living they need to learn. I think that is not, of course, the only issue, but I think that's something that could really be helped, especially by the private sector.
Great. Oh, thank you all very much. It's been really a pleasure for me. I don't often get to play with Legos while I'm moderating, so that was a total bonus.
You can keep it.
And awesome. And so please, everyone, join me in thanking our great panel today.